Today I want to talk to you about God's Christmas plan. Look at what John chapter 1 verse 1 through 5 says. In the beginning, the Word was already there. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, and He was with God in the beginning. All things were made through Him. Nothing that has been made without Him. Life was in Him, and that life was the light for all people. The light that shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not overcome the light. The Word became a human being. He made His home with us. We have seen His glory. It is the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, and the Word was full of grace and truth. You see, this is the very Christmas story, that God came to earth in person, in human form. And that Word that John is referring to is none other than Jesus. You see, here's the main thing you should know from what we just read. It's that God always had a plan to come in person. It's the very day that we celebrate as Christmas. Christmas Day was always part of the plan. But did God come in person? Did He really come in person? I mean, really? Is Jesus really God? Well, let's think about this together. The first thing you should know from these opening sentences in John is that Jesus is in fact God. That's the first point, is that Jesus is God. John plainly says, and the Word was God, in the very first sentence, meaning the same Word that came to Moses, to Abraham, and really every time God would speak in the past, well, that Word came from Jesus. Those very words that came from God were Jesus Himself speaking. Not to mention, Jesus did things that no human person, no only human person could do, like incredible miracles, healing people, raising dead people to life, walking on water, calming storms with just one word, and so many other things. But the greatest thing He did was His actual coming to life, to make His home here with us on earth. You say, wait, Damien, I came to life. Doesn't that make me special? Yes, but every one of you has a human father. But you see, Jesus was the only person ever born without a human father. You see, His Father was in heaven before time itself, and also at the time that Jesus was placed in His mother's womb, her belly. That's the miracle of Christmas. You see, a miracle is when something absolutely impossible happens. Now, speaking of impossible, I love seeing things that I think are impossible. I love seeing things happen that I think maybe might be incredibly impossible. Occasionally, my boys and I will watch the Dude Perfect guys hit their impossible shot. Matter of fact, here's one of our favorite Dude Perfect shots. Take a look.
That worked nicely.
Now, if you know about Dude Perfect, you know these guys mostly miss their impossible shots until they finally capture the perfect shot, that one impossible shot. And of course, that's the one that we get on the screens and it blows our minds, right? And what do we always do after watching a stream of those Dude Perfect shots? Yeah, you know. You break out the basketball, you break out the ping pong balls, the dartboard, or whatever. And what do you always say to your brother, your sister, your friend, your parent, whoever you're playing with? You always say about that one possible thing, oh, that's just luck. But can you do it again? But get it. The birth of Jesus that we celebrate on Christmas is not the only way that Jesus did the absolutely and completely impossible. It's actually when Jesus died, then He came back to life. That's just as amazing and impossible. Oh, He did it again. He did it twice. But here's just two major differences between God's amazingly impossible feats and those of the Dude Perfect guys, or anything else you've ever seen. One is that only God Himself could do the absolutely impossible by coming alive not once but twice through a miracle, but secondly, a trick shot is not entirely impossible. Coming alive miraculously not once but twice, that is impossible. That's an actual miracle and the greatest miracle ever. Now, who can do that? Only God Himself can. So that must mean that Jesus is the very creator of life itself. It must mean He is God. Now, the second thing we see in John 1 is that Jesus made all things. He's the creator of all things. Verse 3 says, all things were made through Him. Nothing that has been made was made without Him. The Bible goes on to say in Colossians 1 that the Son, Jesus, is the exact likeness of God who can't be seen. The Son is the first, and He is over all creation. All things were created in Him. He created everything in heaven and on earth. He created everything that can be seen and everything that can't be seen. He created kings, powers, rulers, authorities. All things have been created by Him and for Him. This means you were created by Jesus and for Jesus. In other words, you were created for a reason, a purpose. You see, if all things come about for a reason, a purpose, then that has to mean that the Christmas story is no different. It has to mean that Jesus had a plan and a reason for His coming on Christmas Day. Do you know what that reason is? Well, it was to be the very one who rescues the world that He Himself created. Cue the Princess Peach rescue music! Then finally, the third and last thing we see in these verses in John chapter 1 is that Jesus is life and light. Going back to me and my son's favorite Dude Perfect shot. The reason why God had to come to us in person is because we can never stand before Him. And the reason why is because to go to God, we have to be perfect. Do you know that when the guys of Dude Perfect shoot the bow and arrow, it's a sport that's called archery. And to hit the center mark, the bullseye, that's a picture of how perfect you have to be to go before God. But sin is an archery term that means to miss the mark, to miss the bullseye. Do you know that we all miss the bullseye mark of God's perfection? And we can't go before God with our sin. But here's the good news of Christmas, that God came to us to live the perfect life for us in our place. It's the gift of God to us, His grace. And that's what grace means, an undeserved, unearned gift. That's why verse 14 says, and the Word was full of grace and truth. You see, to miss the bullseye means we die. But God's grace through Jesus means we live. It means we live forever. So in other words, Jesus is God's greatest gift, the gift of Himself to us. And God's gift, grace, equals life. But Jesus to us also means we get God's light. So Jesus equals God with us, which really equals light. You see, God's light shows us what is hidden in the dark, because light shines on the truth. Now, do you see how grace and truth equals life and light? You see, CF kids, to be a Christian means you've experienced God's grace and truth, His life and light.